Welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I am your host, Joy Votrobek, and with me is our senior analyst, Laurence Sanford.
Nice to be here, Joy.
Welcome back, Larry. And today we're going to discuss the ongoing massacre, the recent Christmas massacre in Nigeria of the Christian farmers. And this is I say ongoing because this happened last year.
It's been happening for years.
It's been going on for years, but in your article you specifically talked about last year's and then again this Christmas again. So Larry wrote an article this week titled Jihad in Africa. It's not just in Nigeria, it's all over Africa. And you can find all of Larry's articles at our website, www.ascf.us. Please consider signing up for our newsletter and please consider donating so we can continue to bring public awareness to national security issues. Larry, you said jihad in Africa has been going on for quite some time.
In Nigeria, in the last decade, 50,000 Christians have been slaughtered by Islamic jihadists. And one thing we have to clarify is the language. Jihad means struggle. And Islamophiles, those who defend Islam, say that primarily jihad is an inner struggle. Well, people of faith all have inner struggles. People have inner struggles. But in common usage and the most recent thing throughout history, Islamic warriors have embarked on jihad, on the struggle to make the world Islamic. So it's an armed struggle by Islamic to dominate the world. And so they're using in Africa, for example, because of the climate change, and the climate has been changing now for the last 4.5 billion years here on Earth. It continues to change. Back in Roman times, for example, the Sahara Desert was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Now it's all sand. So things change, and the Sahara is expanding. And the herdsmen in the Sahel, which is the Sahara Desert and surrounding countries, are primarily of the Fulani tribe. And they're a Muslim group, and they're encroaching, their land is diminishing for pasture land because of the drought. In other words, the Sahara is getting bigger and the grazing lands are getting smaller. So they're encroaching on farmers who are primarily Christian. And so there is some merit to the argument that it is a climate change issue. But the main argument is not the main argument. The main argument is they're engaged in a jihad. And as a sister in Nigeria, a Roman Catholic nun, said it's hard to tell our fellow Christians that it's a climate change when the jihadists are coming in dressed in black, yelling Allahu Akbar and saying death to Christians. So it is a component of the drought, but primarily it's an ideological effort by the Muslims to take over more and more of Nigeria. Nigeria is
Go ahead.
And Nigeria is 220 million people,
yes,
and split 50.5% for Muslims, 49% for others. And the Christian faith is Catholics, Protestants, evangelicals, and they're primarily farmers and village people, whereas the Fulanis, a section of them in many ways, are herdsmen. But the thing that makes it difficult for the Christians living in Nigeria is the government is run by Muslims. And the last two presidents have both been Fulani tribesmen. Their efforts to control the jihadists, Boko Haram, has been very unsuccessful. And so they continue to rage all over Nigeria.
And I was going to bring that up. So basically you covered Fulanis, first of all. And I also want to point out, too, that terrorism by Muslims in Africa has increased more since the war on terrorism in the Middle East, as we have worked on getting rid of ISIS and Al-Qaeda over in Syria, Iraq. They are now popping up, I won't say just now, they're popping up more in Africa, in the Sahel region specifically, but under different names and some offshoots of them.
There is all sorts of different Muslim groups. There's a whole list. The UN lists a list of terrorism, and I think there's 50 or 60 Islamic terror groups. I mean, ISIS is there, Al-Qaeda is there. They just keep on coming.
And if you could specifically point out or brief us on Boko Haram and the meaning of Boko Haram.
Boko Haram is a Western education is forbidden. Boko is a term for education, Western education. Haram is forbidden. So you hear that phrase a lot. Haram. Muslims can't eat pork. That's haram. They can't drink alcohol. That's haram. So haram is a word for forbidden. And
I think a lot of our listeners probably remember Boko Haram the most from kidnapping over 200 children.
Women,
girls from the
from the school, and they do that. And of course, some of the girls have come back, some escaped, but they pretty much, again, it's in the history of Islam. They raid them and they make them wives. So and in Islam, you can have up to 4 wives. So they have 3 or 4 of these schoolgirls as wives, and it's fairly easy to get rid of them. Just say, I divorce thee, I divorce thee, I divorce thee, and see you later. So,
and as you point out before, again, another modern-day slavery issue, really.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So the question is, what do you do about it?
And that's going to be one of my questions.
That's one of your questions. Yeah. Thanks, Joy.
Well, first, you point out too in your article that it's not just Nigeria. Nigeria is a big problem. It's a huge, the largest state in Africa. And I will also point out that I think it's the 2nd largest kidnappings in the globe.
Or first, one or the other. It's right up there with the rapes and the kidnappings and abductions. And,
But there is a lot of other Islamic attacks going on in Africa.
Yes.
And you state here specifically, like, mosque is destroyed in Gaza, storing Hamas. A mosque is destroyed in Gaza, storing Hamas military weapons, and the world is aghast. But 18,000 churches in Africa are destroyed, and the world yawns.
Yes.
No UN votes are condemning the atrocities.
Right.
No Washington, D.C. rallies are protesting the slaughters and enslavements.
No. And
so what is
the most egregious example, and I was educated at a Jesuit college in New England, taught by Jesuits, and the most egregious example of Christianity's lack of response is the current Pope Francis. He's a Jesuit, and from Argentina, and I think he's one of those liberation Jesuits that is basically a Marxist. And he has been absolutely mum, quiet, not jumping to the defense of Christians on a worldwide basis when they're under control. He kowtowed to the Chinese government in the selection of bishops, and he never condemns all these atrocities being committed all over the world by Muslims. And to me, if you can't talk about it, you can't put up a resistance, then you're failing in your job. And he is miserable, as far as I'm concerned, in defending the faith. And that's his #1 job, defend the faith.
In your opinion, why do you think this is of him and of, I mean, really in general, they're not receiving attention in Africa as much as...
Western press, I know. Well, the Western press does a lot of things I don't understand. I can't understand it. I think there's always the fear of retribution from Islam. And a perfect example to me is that you have a Dane burning a Quran in Sweden. And the Muslim countries threaten to boycott Denmark. They threaten to boycott Sweden. Embassies are attacked all over the world. And the Chinese Communist Party in Xinjiang, which is a Muslim-majority province of China, they're imprisoning the Muslims, they're enslaving the Muslims, they're raping the Muslims, and not a peep out of the Muslim world. I can't explain that either, other than maybe it's money and power and the fact that the Chinese will basically tell them, go pound sand in the Sahara.
And do you believe, well, I'm assuming you do according to your paper here, but the latest march, this was from the recent massacre over Christmas, brought in a big rally in Nigeria, and they are saying that this is a genocide. Do you believe this is a genocide of the Christians?
Absolutely. It's a genocide. You're going after an ethnic minority to try to kill them. They've been doing it for 1,400 years in a way. So, yeah. There's plenty of Muslims that are very peaceful, loving human beings. It only takes a very small percentage to be violent and terroristic and committing Jihad. And so if the Muslim community starts to lose faith in the violence aspect of Islam, and to do something about it. That's the real cure. They, just like the Soviet Union, disappeared with a whimper, not a bang. And hopefully the violent aspect of Islam will disappear with a whimper and not a bang. So it's going to take that, but it also takes reaction, a strong reaction. You just can't let them continue to do that. I would point that the first war that the United States engaged in after freeing itself in the War of Independence back in 1776 was against Muslim slave traders and pirates from the shores of Tripoli. And we're facing that kind of pirates in the Red Sea and the Somalia and all these other places. And
so we talked briefly a little bit, like you were saying, about your peace through strength solutions. And you say recognize that Islamic terrorist organizations are alive and expanding, which we just discussed. Their goal is Islamic world domination, and the groups include Boko Haram, ISIS, Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and there's a lot of other different names on the UN list that you mentioned. Support local African governments that are battling these terrorists. And then support Christian organizations fighting for survival in Africa, and certainly the Nigerians that are marching to get justice for this recent massacre.
Yeah, there's a group called CSI, Christian Solidarity. They work very hard on freeing slavery from the Sudan and Somalia and those. In other words, the Muslims come in and raid the black Christian communities for slaves. And they've been doing it for 1,400 years. So. Another group is Americans for Peace and Tolerance. This man, Charles Jacobs, he's headquartered in the Boston area, and I've met him a number of times.
Well, thank you very much, Larry, for this brief.
Okay.
Thank you to our listeners. And again, you can find all of Larry's articles at www.ascf.us. Again, subscribe to our newsletter for all of our updates on our podcast and our newsletter and articles. And you can go to both Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, as well as subscribe to YouTube and Rumble. And join us again next time as we bring you Peace Through Strength podcast.